If you are trans, bite the bullet on that. You don't have to fight against that so hard. I think that sometimes when people get into trans advocacy online, they make two brutal mistakes. Number one is they try to totally...
Then you actually just disagree with medical consensus within the Western nation.
Yes, I disagree with the false medical consensus driven by politically driven, quote-unquote, doctors. If any doctor denies to me that there is a dichotomy between male and female...
And then you have to be careful because this is going to be how conservatives will railroad you. And the problem is that, like... But I remember I made the argument a long time ago, if we were to encounter an alien species, my assumption would be...
Why do you believe you're right about trans people given the American Psychological Association, American Medical Association, American Psychoanalytic Association? I can go on for about 5 more associations that are very prominent and govern the existing like health government or health industries within like the major Western countries. And all of these associations have multiple thousands of doctors, sociologists, psychologists, and with PhDs in their respective fields backing the idea that sex and gender are different, effectively gaining the medical consensus for sex and gender being 2 different concepts, yet you have a different opinion.
Okay, so sex and gender are 2 different concepts, but gender is tied to biology. So one of the...
Oh, he kind of came along with that. They're 2 different concepts.
Big problems that you see in sort of the argument in favor of trans rights is this notion that gender and sex are completely separable. They're not completely separable. If they are completely separable, then this means that identifying people by their subjective gender really has no relevance as to whether they are a male or a female. Male and...
Okay, why conservatives are so binary in their thinking, right? Like, if they're separate, they must be wholly and completely unrelated. If they're related, they must be completely and wholly separate. Like, bro, just... It's like with the vaccine. Why would I take the vaccine if it's a 100% success rate? Like, bro, just take a deep breath, okay? Just chill for a second. Jesus.
Female are biological terms. So using terminology like male and female to describe a self-perception of maleness or femaleness is sort of a bizarre way of arguing whether a thing is a man or a woman. So here's my question. It's an argument that my friend Matt Walsh likes to make. What is a woman? Define what a woman is without reference to the word woman, please.
So this is actually a logical fallacy called a red herring. You're asking me a question in different or...
Synth, why are you... Don't be a debate, bruh.
In order to actually challenge my question without actually
No, it isn't. I'm saying that it really is not. I'm saying that biology, I'm agreeing with you that the notion of gender, which is effeminateness or masculinity, can be different from biology in the sense that biology is just pure male or pure female. But to suggest that...
The easiest response to this question is when somebody is like, okay, if we're not going to use biology, define how you think I'm, how do you define man or woman, right? If you want to point to the difference between like gender or sex, then the easiest way to say this is like, okay, well, let's say that you're in a supermarket and you see somebody. You generally make a mental determination if you're dealing with a man or a woman. How do you do that? It's not on chromosomes because you're not testing it there. It's not on genitalia. You don't usually see those in public settings, depending on how creepy you are, right? It's highly societally driven.
That there is such a thing as an effeminate male is not to suggest that an effeminate male is now a woman. Transgenderism makes the argument that if you believe that you are a woman, you are therefore a woman. Or if you believe that you are a man, you are therefore a man. I disagree with this. There are objective measures as to whether you're a man or a woman. There are objective measures as to whether you're male or female. There's certainly a spectrum when with regard to effeminateness versus masculinity.
We're also saying there are objective measures to which you are on something. Sure, but like the objective measures could still be subjectively preferred. Let me explain to this, okay? Or let me say this, okay? So if I point to a wind ensemble versus an orchestra, okay, it is objectively true that in a wind ensemble, there are no string instruments. It is objectively true that in an orchestra, there are... Wait, what did I say? Did I say string instruments or wind instruments? I'm sorry. I don't remember what I just said. In a wind ensemble, there are no string instruments. That is true. And in orchestra, there are string instruments. That is true, right? Now, both of these things are objectively true, that you have string instruments in an orchestra and not in a wind ensemble. However, it's subjective that we prefer there to be string instruments in an orchestra versus a wind ensemble. We could have wind ensembles and say wind ensembles have string instruments, orchestras don't, right? That's so using objective here is a bit of a I don't want to say a bit of a red herring, but it doesn't really convey what you think it conveys, you know?
That's certainly true, but that does not change the underlying sexual dichotomy that is the basis for all human reproduction. Yeah, you can answer.
Right, so this dichotomy...
That makes literally no sense. Okay. I don't know how that didn't make sense. We'll try it with another analogy, okay? I could say that a table has 4 legs and has like a certain appearance. You could set things on it. And a chair has some number of legs and you can sit on it, right? Now we could say that like it is objectively true that a table has some shelf that you can put things on. It is objectively true that a chair is able to be sat upon. While those things are true, the choice of whether or not we define those things as having a shelf or being like sit uponable, those are subjective. You could argue like normative choices. That's a subjective choice. So there might be like objectivity in what we choose, but that comes after we make I'm trying to think of another way to say normative preference. That comes after we make the subjective choice of how to box things. Does that make sense? Is this really that confusing, or am I not? Do I need to draw pictures? Destiny, we need to focus on ambiguous genitalia. No, we don't. So you think someone should be mutilated at birth to become a boy or girl? Transgender comes later for those confused afterwards. No, I don't necessarily think that's the case at all. Making decisions about what intersex people's sexual identity should be at birth, I think, is a really big problem that intersex people face. Destiny, to your supermarket example, wouldn't you identify a woman by her looks? And wouldn't that just go back to biology? You could do it by looks, but 1, this is an imperfect measure, and 2, many aspects of looks are social and not necessarily biological. So for instance, women tend to have long hair, men tend to have short hair. There's no biological foundation for that. It just is the case that in society, that's the way that we kind of do it. Women tend to shave their skin more than men. They tend to shave their legs, etc. There's not like a biological foundation for women having smooth legs. That's like a social decision. The types of clothing that we wear, the types of jewelry that we wear, these things. Now, there might be some, like, we can make some biological appeals to, like, you know, structures of the face or, you know, things like boobs or booty, fat distribution of the body. These are going to be imperfect proxies for sex. Because you have effeminate-looking men, you've got masculine-looking women, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just saying, like, we can clearly see there's a distinction, but the way that we evaluate whether someone is male or female isn't done in the way that conservatives will claim, oh, well, it's by genitalia and chromosomes. Like, we make this, like, most people don't ever see their chromosomes under a microscope. I just think it's pretty obvious that that's not how we're making socially these determinations of somebody's gender.
Is a false dichotomy that isn't supported by any of the medical associations that I just named
Then
off.
let me
None
explain.
of the medical associations that I just named off would actually support the idea that gender is biological. This is something that's completely untrue.
Okay.
Okay, cynical Brit, cool. Physics examples. If we define blue as wavelengths between 500 and 525 and green as wavelengths between 525 and 565, we can objectively differentiate blue and green, but setting those delineations is a subjective choice and isn't based on some underlying fact. I think the example is really clear and understandable and hard to disagree with. Sure, good job. You said that we identify people's gender in public without knowing their genitalia. So what you're saying is that if someone can trick you into thinking something, that makes it a thing. How about a cardboard cutout of a car? No. I'm making the argument that we evaluate mentally. Like, I think that the idea that gender and sex are two separate things that we can evaluate, that should come relatively intuitively. Because when we make gender distinctions in public, we're not doing it off of like scientific evidence, right? We're going by social evidence. Can it be said that biology does have some basis on gender norms and things like physical strength dictated power roles in society? Absolutely, 100%. A lot, like in 98% of scenarios, your sex and gender are going to line up like pretty specifically. Or a lot of the differences between the genders, between our gender norms, are going to have some foundation in our biological sexes. So like women tend, an example I use is women tend to shave their skin versus men who don't, right? There's probably some reasons why biologically men tend to have, actually, you know what? I'm not even going to make that statement as much. A lot of guys are really gross and just don't take care of themselves at all. So actually, I don't even know if that's true. I'm going to be careful before I say that, before I give you guys an excuse to be fucking disgusting. So actually, I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm going to hold on that because because men are fucking gross. Jesus.
every single like medical consensus.
Well, then I will just say that anyone who suggests that gender has no reference whatsoever to biology, it's not connected in any way to biology.
I don't think if you are trans, bite the bullet on that. You don't have to fight against that so hard. I think that sometimes when people get into trans advocacy online, they make two brutal mistakes. Number one is they try to totally disassociate gender and sex. Don't have to do that, and don't do that, number one. And number two, they get really scared about admitting that that your gender can be socially influenced. It might be the case that, our sexual orientation might be socially influenced. We don't know if there's a fucking gay gene or if there is like some collective circumstances early on in life that might activate some polygenetic part of your personality that somehow makes you gay or bisexual, right? We don't know 100%. You can be like pro-trans 1,000,000%, and you can also say like, yeah, gender and biology are oftentimes really closely tied together. And yeah, environmental factors can definitely influence your experience of gender and sex, or even your sexual orientation. Like, that's totally okay to say that. You don't lose any part of the argument by doing that.
Biology is just full of shit. Because if in any way over to biology, it's not connected in any way to biology, is just full of shit. Because if the reason I and the reason that I say
then you actually just disagree with medical consensus within the Western nation.
Yes, I disagree with the false medical consensus driven by politically driven quote unquote doctors. If any doctor denies to me that there is a dichotomy between male and female,
and then you have to be careful, because this is going to be how conservatives will railroad you. And the problem is that like you can't cite medical experts to say like, oh, these things are totally different, because like everybody in the room knows that's not true. Every single person is like 95% of the time, if I see a man, I know they're a man. If I see a woman, I know they're a woman, right? Like, people will say stuff like that. And that's their lived experience. So I think it's okay to come a little bit to the center and be like, or not even come to the center. You're not compromising your position at all. Just be like, yeah, of course, gender and sex are definitely linked. Absolutely. Even in the case of trans people, gender and sex can theoretically be linked in different ways, right? Like, yeah, of course.
A sexual dichotomy between male and female. They're ignorant, and they are letting their politics get in the way of their science. Anybody who suggests to you that there is such a thing, for example, as a pregnant male is not a doctor, they are an activist.
I'm very glad that none of these opinions are actually accepted in academia and haven't been for over 70 years. Synth is here on Twitter.
Okay, so the notion that they haven't been accepted for over 70 years is a bizarre one, considering they were accepted until about 5 minutes ago. And the basic idea that male and female do not exist runs counter to all mammalian biology, all of it, not just human. Are we to suggest that gender and sex are different in walruses? How does this work exactly? Like, are they different in bears? Anytime you have all mammalian reproduction is rooted in the idea that there's a sexual dichotomy between male and female. To obscure that with all sorts of semantic word games about how you feel subjectively has no bearing on whether male and female are categories that exist. And if you're trying to define male and female with reference to any subjective category that cannot be identified by any metric whatsoever other than how you feel today, I challenge whether that is scientific or whether that is merely a self-perception that is being guided by a political agenda.
Something else that I think would help too, and I know that a lot of people have trouble with this, even religious people, which Ben Shapiro is people do not understand the vast amount of normativity that has to take place before you ever have a scientific discussion. So just to be clear, I don't know how much I want to get into this conversation. Okay. Male and female, those concepts aren't found anywhere in the natural world. If you're a biologist, you don't like look under a microscope and you see like, oh, it says male here and female, right? We have normative decisions that we make, meaning there are like these subjective value statements that we make as humans where we're like, okay, we have a general collection of traits here. We're going to box that this way. We have a general collection of traits here. We box this way. And we do this because it provides some utility to us, right? Now, it seems to be the case that across the vast majority of the world, we have like a male box and a female box. And we can generally line them up with these traits, right? But it's important to remember that before that is happening, you've already made like this kind of normative decision. You've already made a value statement saying this is how we're going to group things up. These aren't necessarily like objective facts of the world, but yeah, I don't know. That's like a whole other conversation on. It's weird to see Destiny. This is just wrong. Reproduction is the most basic function of life. First of all, that's probably not even true. I'm pretty sure it's like fucking metabolism or something is a more basic thing than reproduction, but whatever. This conversation is really hard to have with just chat. There's a term called scientism, where people think that like science can be this like self-sustaining, like provides all of its philosophical, epistemic, ethical norms or whatever, like internally, and then like power itself the way it can. A whole lot of other work happens before you ever even can begin science. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens before you can even get to the scientific part. There's so much normativity that is like instantiated. There's so many value statements that have to be made before you can actually start doing science. It's not a system that gets itself up off the ground on its own. But that's like a whole other conversation. I don't feel like getting into it right now. You mean the way we attribute concepts to things we observe, like the subjectivism that comes from the observer when he makes those decisions and all? I'm just trying to say that like when you talk about objective or subjective, we have like different layers of the conversation. Here's an example, okay? Now let's say that I define every single person that's above 180 centimeters is tall, and every single person that's below 180 centimeters is short, okay? Let's say that I make that definition. Now, let's say then that I measure somebody and I say, you are 195 centimeters, okay, tall. You are tall. Now, if somebody comes up to you and like, that person is objectively tall, that is true. But if somebody says tallness is objective, that's not true. Like, where we decide what is tall and what is short, that is a normative decision. That is a subjective, value-based decision that we've made prior to getting to doing the measurements and then seeing if those measurements comport with what we've prior said is tall or short. Does that make sense? So if I say that 190 cm, if I say that 180 and up is tall and 179 and below is short, that's a subjective statement. But past that subjective norm, I can move on to the next step where I do science and I take measurements and I make it reproducible. Now I measure someone and they're like, oh, that person is 195 cm. Well, that person is tall. Sure, they are tall, but that's only in relation to a norm that we instantiated that's not found somewhere naturally in the world. That's what I'm trying to say. So when it comes to like gender or sex or whatever, past these subjective norms we created, we can say like, well, a man is a man, a woman is a woman. Yeah, sure, that's true. But we can also back up and understand that some amount of normativity had to happen before we can even decide what man or woman is, right? Because tallness and shortness are not found in the universe. The same way that male and female are not found in the universe. It's all matter that we organize in our own ways as humans. If you don't believe me, take a whole bunch of mushrooms and you'll figure it out. So people are saying, isn't it based on statistical significance? Isn't it based on averages though? You can say all of that if you want, but you have to make that decision, right? For instance, so what is tall? When you talk about like an average, is tall literally anything over 50%? If you were at 51% height, does that make you tall? Or should it be like a first standard deviation? How should we even define what a standard deviation is? Is it past 70%, 80%? Is it something that, or should we not even use statistics? Should it actually be based on rarity and how likely you're to encounter a person in your day-to-day life? Right, there are like, these are, again, all of these are subjective statements that we're making in terms of how, I'm not trying to challenge or destroy your whole worldview. I'm not trying to say like, oh, everything you know about men and women is wrong, blah, blah. Don't get so uncomfortable, okay? I'm just saying that like you should question a little bit more the norms that you probably take for granted in your life, okay? There's a lot of stuff that we think like objectively exists as like a fabric of the universe that doesn't. There's a whole lot of normativity and subjectivity that goes into your life. Now, to be fair, and the reason why a lot of people will fight back whenever you say this, and a lot of people in chat are ultra ass mad about it, right? Just because something has an amount of normativity that goes into it prior to us, like, you know, really tangling with it, that doesn't make it bad. It doesn't make it worthless. Just because something is a social norm or socially constructed doesn't make it not real, okay? It doesn't make it a dumb concept, right? There are plenty of things that are socially constructed that confer great utility to humans. The concept of fucking diabetes is arguably socially constructed. Not arguably, it is, right? What level of insulin sensitivity should a person have where they're diabetic, right? But having that classification of this is a diabetic person is incredibly important. I'm talking about type 2 diabetes, and before some dipshit right now is hammering on the keyboard, well, type 1 diabetic just has an autoimmune disease. Fuck you. Okay. So yeah, like there are socially constructed things, like diseases is a socially constructed thing that has some fact of the world underlying, probably. So like it might be a virus, it might be a condition of the body, it might be whatever. But there can be value in these things because they, you know, direct future human action to hopefully lead to human flourishing or lack of suffering at least. Okay. Destiny, a DMT entity once corroborated what you just said. Great point. I'm glad, dude. You know what? Tell that entity that I said, what's up? Okay, cool. How do you go about man versus woman conversations? People think man and women are defined by God, or you just not. If people are getting definitions from God, they're appealing to some sort of divine revelation that is. These are, we would call this an intractable problem. Okay, you can't do anything for that conversation. The only way that I found to talk to people like that is usually if you ask them, what do you do when two people with different divine revelations come together? How do you figure out which one is right and which one is wrong? Usually what happens is it'll just break people's minds, and then you get into a screaming match. That's what's happened every time I've come against somebody that gives these kinds of arguments. Tristan, here's my question. Tristan, I have just one question for you, okay? Let's say somebody comes up to you and they say murder is good. And then you say murder is bad. And then he says, well, how do you know murder is bad? And you go, because God told me. And then you ask him, why do you think murder is good? And he says, because God told me. How do you resolve that disagreement?
Dude, this is the stupidest hypothetical. That's not an argument at all. Dude, can you do that again? That was really
Sure.
fun.
I'll repeat the question to you. Two people try to resolve a moral quandary. Two people have a moral question, and they come to the answer. And they have two different answers for it, but they both say that they've received revelation through God. How do you resolve that disagreement and figure out who's right and who's wrong? This is the problem with grounding your meta-ethics with divine revelation, and it's why presuppositionalism sucks. It's ultimately circular at a foundation that is inaccessible to external parties. Do you understand? I could tell you that God has revealed anything to me, and I automatically win the argument. Do you understand the problem with that? Do you see why this is? That's not the
idea. You're straw manning the argument.
I'm not straw. Then can you tell me? Then answer the question. Two people that both believe in God have a different answer to a moral question. How do you figure out which one is right and which one is wrong?
Truth isn't given to us simply intellectually. You try to intellectualize truth. You try to intellectualize morality, right? Morality is something that is metaphysical. It is something that is transcendental. We require something that is transcendental to ground objective truth and objective morality.
Just so you know, when you're done with this ramble, I'm gonna ask you the same question. So go ahead and ramble as much as you want. But go ahead.
Dude, this is ridiculous. So you're not actually letting me answer the questions.
I'm letting you answer right now. Go answer. But I'm going to tell you, I'm going to ask the same question because you're not answering, because you don't have an answer to that. And this is the problem. Fundamentally, this is the problem with people like you that try to make... Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Again, you're just steamrolling. The debate was over 15 different times in this conversation.
So I just want to draw everybody's attention to the fact that this is the final question where Tristan will be done. He's shut down now. This is where all presuppositionalists come. Because guess what, guys? Moral fact is unobservable. And when somebody tells you that they can know moral fact through an internal experience, and when by definition your internal experience is inaccessible, the content of your mind is inaccessible to any other party, then we can never verify those contents. So if two people have a disagreement over what they both perceive to be as divine revelation, that disagreement can never be resolved, which is why meta-ethics is a garbage fuck waste of time, especially with a presuppositionalist that thinks that God is giving them the fucking answers. There's been a number of terrorists and cult leaders and people that have raped and murdered and shot and whatever people who all say they got divine revelation from God, and every single one of them was just as right as the other person. So I will repeat the question once more to you, Tristan. How do two people that disagree on a moral question resolve their disagreement when both of them say that God directly revealed the answers to them?
See again, you accuse me of rambling. I start to give you an answer. You immediately interrupt and go on a long, methy ramble while nodding your head around like you're freaking...
This is the dodge that I told you guys about. He's not going to engage with this question because this is what shuts down the presup arguments.
But now God was incarnate, and God was not a homosexual or a coomer. Let's do a physique check and take off your shirt, Destiny. Your physique is inferior to mine, therefore your argument is moot. Or Destiny, you're a stupid fat. Therefore,
whoa! Chill!
Oh my, come on. We gotta keep it within TOS.
The strict philosophical term sometimes given to these people, depending on how anal they get about their arguments, is presuppositionalism. And it's just an absolute fucking cancerous line of thought, and it's so stupid. And yeah. Destiny, what utility does the idea of transgenderism give to some who isn't a transgender person or is against the concept? If it doesn't, why should they change their ideas of categories to accommodate transgenderism? Okay, so the concept is, here, so we can give examples on both sides of this. Let's say that it is the case that if we slightly expand our concept of what is man and what is woman, then maybe people that have, maybe people that are born trans people, or maybe people that are trans people, I should say more carefully, people that are trans people, maybe it alleviates a great deal of suffering or mental anguish or whatever throughout their lives. And let's say that we don't really lose much by slightly expanding that definition, which I don't really think we do, except in some edge cases, maybe like in Olympic events or athletic events, right? If that is the case, then I think there's a good argument for, changing a little bit our definition of man versus woman, right? Destiny, that's why we from classic science hate philosophy shits like you. No, this is why scientists should absolutely be forced to take, at the very least, a philosophy of science course, because nothing is more cringe than somebody that studies science but has no fucking idea how much normativity is loaded into their shit before they even pick up, a fucking magnifying glass or a fucking pencil or a fucking calculator. Okay, you have absolutely no idea. Scientists that don't have an inkling for philosophy, or they think that they're above it or better than it, when I'm pretty sure philosophy is like the first science, it's actually mind-numbingly fucking stupid. And the ironic thing is that the deeper you go into certain sciences, the more people will have an appreciation and an understanding for philosophy as well, especially the purer you go in your discipline. Like, there's no fucking way. Well, I could be wrong, but I'd be surprised if you get into somebody that's very high on like the theoretical physics end, like pure physics, or somebody that is like a pure math major. Like, oftentimes I don't think these are the same people that are like, oh yeah, philosophy's so stupid. It's like, really, bro? Right? Like, these people seem to have a greater appreciation for it. I think the more applied your science gets, the more it's easy to kind of lose sight of like, oh yeah, there is a whole lot of normativity in here, But yeah, the Bill Nye thing is the perfect example of how cringe. Although I don't know if Bill Nye is a scientist or not. He's just like an entertainment. But Destiny, if we didn't exist, male and female would still exist, whether they are named as such. Wrong. Well, I guess we can debate on like universal categories, but I would say that categories don't exist. These are mind-dependent concepts. So for instance, there are going to be underlying facts of the matter that I think exist, independent of human minds, but the grouping of those things as like collective entities, that doesn't exist. So for instance, if all of mankind were to disappear, like there would be a whole bunch of matter that exists in this area, all the whatever that goes into this construction, all the materials here, but the concept of this unit as a building, I think that concept would disappear. Same thing, like the concept of male versus female, I don't think that's etched into the universe anywhere. That's just, these are like human concepts that we impose on the world to like organize it and make sense of it. Someone in YouTube chat said, any objective truth is only subjective to a specific context. Truth systems comprised of a model, a set of propositions, and a truth function by definition of formal languages. For example, sure. I'm trying not to get that deep into it, but arguably you can say that, yeah. I think I agree with you. Do you think that there are overarching concepts that any conscious entity would come to that conclusion? I think so, but I don't know. There was like, I remember I made this argument a long time ago. I could be wrong because there could be other things that we don't even have the sensory organs to perceive, possibly. But I remember I made the argument a long time ago. If we were to encounter an alien species, my assumption would be that we would be able to communicate mathematical truths to them and something akin to the periodic table of elements. That I would have that assumption that these are like two forms of like physics or chemistry. Well, one is mathematics, one is chemistry. Like organization that I would imagine would be somewhat universal, assuming we were all like of sufficient intelligence. It would shock me that you could have any grasp of the universe and not have some kind of like periodic table of elements and not have some kind of mathematical, like fundamental mathematical understanding, right? Destiny, why would nothing and something be mind independent? You said only groupings of matter would exist if there were no humans, but these are mind dependent concepts. I don't know if matter is a mind-dependent thing. I would assume that if all humans cease to exist, the matter around us would still exist, but the categorization of that as a building, as a wall, as a table, or whatever, that those categories don't exist. It would just be matter, right? How would our classification of atoms work? Would you say that our categorization of matter as elements based on protons would be equally subjective? Possibly. I don't even remember, dude. I don't even remember what exists or not. Are protons and neutrons even actual things, or aren't those just comprised of more subatomic particles? I think electrons are supposed to be a thing on their own that exist probabilistically at some cloud, depending on your interpretation of whatever. But I don't know if protons and neutrons on their own. I think, yeah, aren't they all comprised of like quarks or whatever? I don't. It's been a long time. Okay. So even those things aren't technically real, right? Well, but are they real? Is a forest a real thing? Maybe I should just ask this question. Do you think that forests are real? Right? If humans disappeared, would forests still exist, or would we just call them collections of trees? Because if you agree that, like, okay, yeah, a forest is a mind-dependent concept. If humans didn't exist, there wouldn't be forests, there would be trees. Then you would just run that like recursively down all the way, right? Well, are trees real, or is it just wood or bark and fucking leaves, right? Okay, well, is a leaf real, or is it just, you know, all these cells together? Are these, right? I'm just saying that, like, you have mind-dependent concepts, and then you have like an underlying fact of the matter, you know, like matter existing, fact of the matter. Huh, good one.
Wait.
Okay, what is this? Jesus. Fuck, stop. No more philosophy here, okay? Access to an amazing product, okay, that will allow you to access all of your favorite Netflix shows, Amazon shows, anything you want, okay, from whatever connection you're on. And it's called Surfshark, okay? Surfshark.deals/destiny. Oh my God. They have a Black Friday offer, okay? 83% off, 4 months for free, okay? If you're, wherever you're at, if they're blocking, maybe it's another country, maybe it's your hotel, maybe they're blocking Netflix, Amazon Prime, HBO, Showtime, maybe they're blocking, you know what? Access this VPN and you can access all of those shows from any country, any internet connection you want, provided you have the bandwidth available to do so. Okay, you're in another country and you want to watch The Queen's Gambit. You want to watch, I don't know what TV shows are right now, but if you want to watch it, God damn it, you have the ability to. All right, you get a 30-day money back guarantee. So if you try it, you don't like it, you can cancel it, get your money back. Everything will be okay.